Just because a character starts off in a show or movie as a lovable hero doesn't mean they always end their arc that way. In this video, we're going to take a look at 25 times where movie and TV show characters started off as the hero and ended up turning into the villain, and in some cases became fully irredeemable. Let's take a look. Is there a better example of a hero becoming a villain than Breaking Bad's Walter White? Walt started off as a meek, underachieving chemistry teacher, and despite turning to a life of crime, we understood his reasoning and still connected to the character. But as the show went on, Walt became irredeemable, allowing Jane to die after an overdose, poisoning Brock, and killing Mike, just to name a few. While he does have a slight redemption in the finale, it's still not enough to justify everything he did, and Walt definitely becomes the villain in his own story. His cooking partner Jesse Pinkman, however, goes in the opposite direction, as while he may not be the villain, he starts off as a less likable character. But as the show goes on, his moral complexity makes him one of the most beloved characters on the show. Speaking of Breaking Bad, the just-as-good spin-off show Better Call Saul is another great example of a character who starts off as a relatable character and turns into an irredeemable sleazeball. In Breaking Bad, Saul, aka Jimmy, is seen as the slick criminal lawyer who's actually a criminal lawyer. But Better Call Saul shows how the character started and his long, tumultuous journey to the character we know in Breaking Bad. We empathize with Jimmy, and he does start off as a hero or likable character at least, but as we said, slipping Jimmy's character arc is a true work of art. Moving on from one great TV show to the next, many Game of Thrones fans, myself included, weren't too huge on Season 8. Now, one of the reasons why was Daenerys Targaryen's sudden and abrupt descent into villainy, with her burning King's Landing to the ground. Now, while I don't have a big problem with her becoming the villain and do find it kind of fitting, it was the suddenness of it all that was the problem. But anyway, Daenerys starts the show as the hero, the one who could liberate Westeros from corruption, and she sees herself as a liberator instead of a conqueror. Plus, she's also the one that helps defeat the Night King, although her army was seemingly obliterated, only to come back in the next episode because magical armies are tight. But Dany becomes obsessed with reclaiming her birthright and taking over Westeros, and as she loses those closest to her, she descends into madness and violence, becoming the true villain in the closing moments of the show. Alright, now this next one may be playing fast and loose with the term villain, but Vanya's arc in Season 1 of Umbrella Academy does fall into a gray area. Vanya, who seemingly didn't have powers, is revealed to be insanely powerful as the show goes on, and she's a ticking time bomb that will lead to the end of the world. The issue is, it's the ones who are trying to stop her who cause it. To prevent her from bringing on the apocalypse, her family locks her up, leading her to become unhinged and unable to control her power, with her accidentally destroying the moon and fulfilling the prophecy. However, in Season 2, she returns to her hero status, and she never stops being a sympathetic character, so she doesn't fall into the full-on villain category. Like the others on this list, watching Will Graham's descent into madness in Hannibal was a true joy to behold. Now, part of this is down to the brilliant performance by Hugh Dancy and his relationship with Mads Mikkelsen's Hannibal, but the overall writing was another reason why his turn to villainy was so good. Will starts off the show as the mentally disturbed good guy who tracks down serial killers and can empathize with them, but he eventually becomes a killer himself. In fact, showrunner Brian Fuller said if the show had seen a fourth season, Will and Hannibal would be on the run from the FBI, hiding out in Argentina after killing Dolarhyde. And this is another one that is contentious, but member of the Avengers Wanda Maximoff is, in my opinion at least, the villain in WandaVision for a time. While Agatha may be the out-and-out villain, Wanda is the one who causes the hex and controls the people of Westview as her own personal puppets so she can live out her sitcom fantasy. She may not have done it to be cruel or sadistic, but she did take over a town and the people against their will so she could forget her emotional trauma, and her inability to control her powers and the use of chaos magic nearly led to a catastrophe. While Wanda does eventually right her wrongs, there is still the possibility that she will be the villain once again in the upcoming Doctor Strange sequel. In terms of hero characters turning into villains, no one did it on such a grand scale as Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Faith, Angel, and Willow all at one point find themselves playing the villain, although Willow is probably the best example of this, as her journey from the sweet, innocent girl to one of the best and most intricate villains on the show was wonderfully executed. Another great example of a character becoming drunk with power is Light Yagami in Death Note. Light started off the show as someone who genuinely wanted to make the world a better place, but as he came into his godlike power, he ended up becoming corrupted by it and basically turned into the very thing he was originally against. It was brilliantly done in the narrative, and part of the reason for this is the fact that you still never hate the guy. However, like Daenerys, not every character's turn to the dark side is well executed. Take Emma's transition into the Dark One in Once Upon a Time. The character who started off as the show's savior eventually turns to the dark, and while there are some who liked the plot twist, there were many who saw it as the show jumping the shark. Moving away from TV now and into the world of movies, like Walt's transition to the villain in Breaking Bad, Harvey Dent's fall in The Dark Knight was also brilliantly executed. Now, anyone familiar with the comics and the character of Harvey Dent would have known that he was the classic Batman villain Two-Face, but either way, his turn to villainy was perfect. The Joker's grand scheme was to pull Gotham's White Knight down into the seedy underbelly and make him just as crazy, arid, corrupt as himself, and he did just that. And Dent's fall from grace ultimately led to the Joker's victory. What makes this arc even better is the fact that we understand where Dent's anger comes from, as he was betrayed by the cops that he knew were corrupt all along, and because of that, the woman he loved, and who loved him back, ended up dying. Again, like Two-Face, anyone who is even half familiar with Eric Lehnsherr, aka Magneto, knows that he is a classic villain. But Magneto has always been more complex than that, and the way he was handled in X-Men First Class was one of the reasons the movie was so well received. On several occasions, Magneto has actually worked with the heroes in the X-Men movies, but First Class was one of the best examples of when a character with understandable motives and reasoning slowly slips into his role as a complex antagonist. Again, this one might be seen as contentious as a villain, but seeing as his name is in the title for the second Captain America movie, we have to acknowledge Bucky's turn from hero to villain in Winter Soldier. Now, of course, it was against his will, and he was brainwashed by the nefarious organization Hydra, but Bucky is the one to go toe-to-toe with Cap in the movie, and, of course, during his Winter Soldier days, he was also the one to kill Tony's parents and give him even more emotional trauma. Thankfully, though, Bucky manages to get redemption and go through a moment of catharsis in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Another hero to become the villain against his will is Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3. While under the influence of the symbiote Venom, Peter ends up doing some truly dark things, such as trying to kill Harry, hitting MJ, and performing a crime against dancing. Actually, I'm just kidding. Those moves are sick. Peter's edgy turn might have been goofy with his emo haircut, but he does end up at one point being the villain in his own movie before turning back to the side of the light. Another character to turn into the villain in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies is Harry Osborn, who starts off as Peter's friend until the death of his father, where he becomes obsessed with the notion of gaining vengeance and killing Spider-Man. Of course, how can we do this video without mentioning the chosen one, Anakin Skywalker? Anakin might have been the one to bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith, not join them, but of course, as time goes on, Anakin becomes corrupted by both power and the dark side through the honeyed words of the Senate, aka Palpatine, until he becomes one of the greatest villains of all time, Darth Vader. Now, whatever your thoughts are on the prequels and the kind of weak reason that Padme dies, his desperation to save her and his eventual face-off with Obi-Wan was one of the best parts of the prequels, other than the never-ending memes and Obi saying, "Hello there."
Hello there.
And as time has gone on, people have actually started to appreciate Hayden Christensen's performance as Anakin. Except for, the whole sand monologue. Now, calling Michael Corleone the hero in The Godfather might be a stretch, but the character does all he can to resist falling into the family business and becoming a notorious gangster. But after the death of his father Vito and his brother Sonny, and with Fredo not fit to lead, Michael finds himself wearing the Don's shoes, and he fully embraces his role as the Godfather in one of the best and most famous montages of all time. Michael's character arc into the dawn is perfect, and who doesn't love that final shot when he closes the door on Diane Keaton with all traces of Michael from the beginning of the movie gone for good. Again, calling Jack Torrance the hero in The Shining is a stretch, probably more of a stretch than Michael in The Godfather, and Jack Nicholson's version of the character is a lot douchier and unhinged than the one in the book. While both are alcoholics, there does seem to be some genuine guilt in the book version of Jack, while Nicholson's version is seemingly less remorseful. However, he doesn't start off as the axe-wielding lunatic and does seem to genuinely want to provide for his family. But again, he is definitely not a saint at the start of the movie. Speaking of Stephen King novels, Carrie is another great example of a character's heartbreaking descent into becoming the villain. Carrie has had a hard life and a controlling mother and is horribly bullied at school. But her descent is understandable, and even as her powers develop in problematic ways, for the longest time we are still on her side. However, after the prank at the end, she goes a little too far in trying to get revenge for the way that she was treated. The Dark Knight isn't the only Christopher Nolan movie to follow a character's progression from hero to villain, with Leonard Shelby's character arc in Memento a prime example of this. At first, Shelby, who deals with short-term memory loss, seems like the hero of the story as he tries to solve the mystery of what happened to his wife. But as we reach the end, or beginning I guess, it is revealed that Shelby has a darker side than we originally thought. As we said, Nolan likes the hero-to-villain character arc, and he does this again in his underappreciated movie, The Prestige. Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale star as competing magicians who are always trying to one-up each other. And while Jackman's Robert Angier starts off as the more likable of the two, his quest for revenge and his obsession with being the better magician actually sees him play the part of the movie's antagonist. The Terminator franchise is known for its hero and villain swapping, such as Arnie's T-800 turning from the villain to the hero in T2. But one of the most surprising and strange swaps is John Connor turning from hero to villain in Terminator Genisys. Changing the literal savior of the world to the franchise's big bad was seen as the franchise jumping the shark by quite some bit. And it's probably the least justified transition on the list. Even the producers seem to regret that admittedly pretty awful decision. In the Lord of the Rings movies, Saruman the White may not have started as a hero, but the head of the White Council was on the side of the light originally and slowly gets corrupted by the Dark Lord Sauron off-camera through the Palantir. Saruman was actually one of Sauron's greatest adversaries and is, of course, of great help during The Hobbit. But, of course, he too becomes obsessed with the power of the ring and allies himself with Sauron. Saruman as the villain does some pretty terrible stuff, locking up Gandalf, destroying Fangorn Forest, turning Isengard into a barren wasteland, corrupting Theoden, and building an army of Uruk-hai to hunt down the Fellowship and invade Rohan, which he nearly does until he's foiled by Gandalf. Also, Saruman is a great villain because, Christopher Lee. Enough said. Buddy may have never had a chance to be the hero in The Incredibles, but he at least started the movie wanting to be one and had a huge passion to help people and work alongside his idol, Mr. Incredible. However, as you know, you should never meet your heroes, and after meeting Mr. Incredible, Buddy becomes disillusioned with being a hero and uses his intellect and passion to become a supervillain instead and come up with a creation powerful enough to beat his once hero. Andrew from Chronicle is another great example of a character becoming drunk on power after he and two other high school students end up developing superpowers from a meteor. Andrew starts off the movie as a sympathetic outsider who's bullied both at school and at home, but he's still well-intentioned and wants to do good at first. However, he becomes obsessed with becoming the apex predator and does some truly horrible things, and it soon becomes apparent that this is actually the origin of a supervillain, as opposed to a superhero story. Love him or hate him, Scrappy Doo was at least one of the good guys in Mystery Inc., but in the Scooby Doo movie, they decided to make him the villain. The gang gets tired of his arrogance, obnoxiousness, and the fact that he pees everywhere, and they kick him out of their crew. This leads Scrappy to create a plan to take down his one-time friends and teammates by disguising himself as Rowan Atkinson's Monty and luring Mystery Inc. to his island to take them down once and for all. Like Jack Torrance and Michael Corleone, calling Jesse Eisenberg's Mark Zuckerberg a hero in The Social Network would be a bit of a stretch, but he at least isn't the bad guy. But as he rises to power, he completely transforms, pushing those closest to him away, with him being particularly callous to Eduardo Saverin before becoming an arrogant and careless individual that shows the dark depths of his character. Let's end on a contentious one, and quick spoiler warning. In Shutter Island, we start off believing that DiCaprio's Teddy Daniels is the hero of the story and that Ben Kingsley's Dr. Colley is the villain. But as the movie unravels, it's revealed that Daniels isn't quite the hero he was made out to be.